Hello and welcome to Off Defense, a weekly show where we discuss topical events and current affairs in Guyana. I'm your host, Francis Bailey, and this week we're joined by two young stalwarts. We're here with Joel Earl Simpson. I love that word. Joel Earl Simpson representing Blue Caps, and we've got Chevy Devonish representing the Guyana National Youth Council.
Good morning.
Gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no problem. So, we want to have a bit of an off-the-cuff discussion here, keeping to the off-defense theme.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do every month is have a roundup, sort of like this show, called In the Mix, where we just take a look at topical things that have been going on in society and see if we could flesh them out, just have a little conversation about them. So, one thing I wanted to start the ball rolling with would be the 100-day plan. So we're almost close to this 100-day mark, and naturally we're going to start hearing a lot more about it as the 100 days expires. But I was just wondering, what are some of your thoughts on the progress that's been made to fulfilling some of these promises in the manifestos, and general changes that you've seen taking place, things you've seen, and maybe where you think we should be going but haven't gone yet? Joel?
Well, thanks, Francis. I think the new government has a real challenge because from my understanding, a lot hasn't been achieved yet according to the 100-day plan. Mm-hmm. And one of the recent things that we're seeing is already broken promises. The proposal that is currently on the table at the time of recording this show, it might change by the time we air, is that the 20% increase to public servants' salaries has now become, the proposal on the table is now 10%, while the proposed increase for ministers of government, who are also public servants, who are servants of the people, is being proposed at 20%. So I think in a context where a lot of the promises in the 100-day plan have not even been achieved. They haven't even started tackling most of the issues yet. To have one promise being directly broken is a bit of a disappointment for a new government, especially in this honeymoon phase, I think, where great concessions have been made because a lot of people are happy that we have a change. And I think change generally, political change generally, is healthy for democracy. One positive thing has been the cleanup of the city. The Independence Arch looks absolutely beautiful and amazing. It's now a major attraction for citizens. I see lots of photos and of weddings, people going there take photos for weddings and things like that. I don't recall seeing that in over a decade, or maybe over 2 decades,
Maybe more.
or maybe more. So that has been good. The question then becomes sustaining those efforts. And I think this is where local government elections is crucial. And I'm happy to see that the Minister of Communities and the Minister of Public Security both have spoken to the issue in Parliament. I think that this is a very important priority, and that we might have local government elections before the end of 2015.
Well, I'm sure that's going to excite a lot of people. Chevy, what are your thoughts on the 100-day, the progress made over the last 100 days?
Well, I'll just wrap up from where Joel started. Tying yourself, for any government to tie themselves to saying they're going to be executing a certain amount of tasks within a limited amount of time is an extremely good idea, but it can be a double-edged sword because it shows that government has the will. Of course, it can also be perceived as a political gimmick in order to get votes and gain support.
Some might say it's all three.
Some may say that. But it can be an indication that there is the will around to get these things done. That said, because a whole lot, or at least the majority of what they said would have been done has not been done as yet, there are a lot of persons who may be critical of the level of progress attained so far. Some things were done. If we can look at the passing of certain legislation, the AML legislation, that was one of the one of the first things that was done. It was pushed through. It must be noted that there was some criticism by the opposition party about some of the amendments that went into that amendment bill. There were several other legislation that was passed as well. They said they would do this. They did it. Regarding the increase in salaries, I may be wrong, but I think the actual plan said a significant increase in salary. I don't think that it cited a particular figure. I think there was some talk about it, about how much it would go up by, but I think the actual 100-day plan, the document had a significant increase.
But then you also see Joel's point where you're saying, well, they are now raising public servants across the board if it's going to be 10%, but the government ministers who are already public servants, if they were to receive 20%, and we're coming from a culture where, remember, we refer to it as super salaries. Nobody's saying anything about super salaries now, but commonly we did refer to the salaries that many of the ministers used to take home as super salaries.
Correct.
And there are a few developments around Guyana that can evidence perhaps some of the fees that were being earned. So does that strike you as wrong, or do you sticking by it?
Let me jump in there.
Well, just let me finish off.
Yeah.
Sorry to finish off based on where I left off just now. With regard to the raising in salaries for government ministers and advisors and whatnot, there's not too much and I think that's one of the issues so far. I don't think people are getting as much information that they would like to have to explain a lot of things that have been happening with regard to this increase. I saw one article stating that it's to differentiate between the various public servants, advisors and ministers and what's not. It will be perceived in a negative light because we have been hearing a whole lot of we don't have a significant amount of funds to do this and do that as a result of the debts that we have. But the way people are going to see it, and in politics, it is not reality which is important, it is perception that is important. So then perception becomes reality. And if people perceive that we are moving to raise ministers' salaries by this much and the people are only going to be receiving a certain level of increase, that can be very, very, very problematic for government. So what I want to wait and see is what the justification or the explanation, a fuller explanation of what exactly resulted in this policy and particularly budget to see specifically what is going to happen. So
well, we know that a budget hasn't been passed yet, and folks are eagerly looking forward to the passing of a budget. What I would say is that it seems a lot of people are very wary of a continuation of the sort of inequality which entrenched itself in our society during the past few decades, right? And that is the sense. That's the sense I'm getting. You can tell me what your thoughts on this are, but I sense that folks looking around, struggling to survive on the day-to-day, looking at things like the cost of living, having lived the past few decades, seeing some ministers even putting up what you could call mansions. We have a former president that effectively lives in a mansion. Seeing that sort of inequality, the stark inequality, for many, that angered a lot of people. So do you think perhaps we're heading towards a change of that status quo, which it seems many people were eager to come by, or do you get this sense that it's business as usual?
Well, I think August 10th will tell. I think some of the sentiments you're hearing from the man and woman in the street is questioning whether we really got change or we got exchange.
Yeah, or as someone said last night, loose change.
Loose change.
Yes.
No, but I think really when we see what the Minister of Finance presents on August 10th to the National Assembly, then we will know if the serious efforts to really tackle inequality and poverty in Guyana. And Chevy reminded me of an issue that I think is crucial, which is that the opposition, PPPC, take up their seats in Parliament. What are you criticizing legislation for when you have, outside of Parliament, when you have the opportunity to go on record and represent the people in the National Assembly?
Because it's not as if the PPP lost by a landslide. This was a very close election.
Of course.
Right? So technically, those vacant seats are there waiting to be filled so that those people can have the representation that they voted for.
And I think a strong functioning opposition is good for democracy. So it's really important that I think that we end the theatrics and that the opposition, PPPC, takes up their seats in Parliament as soon as possible. I can't understand what the reason for delaying that is.
And your thoughts on this, Chevy, before we go to a break?
Well, if we can come right down from the top very quickly. Speaking as to whether or not we're going to have a continuation of what we've had before, it may not be fair to say automatically that because we're raising salaries and we're going to see the same behavior as we have seen in the past. So what I would say is that because if I'm going to criticize something, I like to criticize from an informed perspective, and I like to have all the information in front of me. So I say, okay, good, fine. The salaries are going to increase. Let's hear the justification. Let's hear the reasoning. Let's hear the explanation. And if, even though for those persons who voted for the current administration, if you have an issue with it, criticize it, because there really should be no loyalty to a particular political party. There should be loyalty to nation, because when you have loyalty to nation, then people start looking at the issues, right? Because when you live in a representative democracy, you employ members of parliament, you employ policymakers to work in your best interest. You are, as the people, you are the employer. And if your employees are not doing their job the way they are supposed to do their job, because remember, you give them a term of reference. And if they're not doing that, then you have the ability to take the necessary steps. With regard to the National Assembly, the Speaker of the National Assembly has, not the Speaker, sorry, the Clerk of the National Assembly has said that the non-participation of the opposition members of the National Assembly has the propensity to dilute the level of scrutiny, because that is what the opposition does.
So it's basically harmful to democracy.
It can be, because it means that then government can make decisions and they're not being thoroughly scrutinized, and that can be problematic.
On that note, I'm guessing it's important for civil society and both arms of government, the opposition and government, to take an active role in the management of the country's affairs.
And I'll just stick this in. When we say civil society, we don't mean organized civil society, but everyone. Because
everybody.
Yeah. We're all
Even
stakeholders.
Looking at this. Okay, on that note, we must take a minute for a break for our sponsors, and we'll be back in a second.
HGP TV is looking for marketing and sales consultants. Are you confident with excellent presentation skills? Are you able to demonstrate your sales success? Do you want to work in media marketing or sales? If you are, we would like to speak to you. Please contact Ms. Carl Felix at carfelix@hgptv.com. Please reply immediately.
Okay, welcome back to the show. We're continuing with Off Defense. We've got Joel Earl Simpson in the studio today representing Blue Caps, and Monsieur Chevy Devonish representing the Guyana National Youth Council. Thanks once again, gentlemen, for being with us. In the first segment, we spoke a bit about the 100 days plan and the fact that that time is drawing to a close. I know in a future show we will go into this in a lot more depth. Chevy is also going to be our 3-minute breakdown man for all matters constitutional and governmental. So as the show develops, as it surely will, you'll see a lot more of that. But I want to turn the discussion now, as we're trying to do a mix of topics here. I want to turn the discussion to something that's very much on people's minds at the moment. Crime, the crime wave, or the crime tsunami, as some call it. What are your perspectives on this as youth, and how do you think this is shaping the security situation in Guyana? Do you see us finding our way out of this, or do you see things getting more negative, especially given recent reports that the economy is not as it once was. I will leave that deliberately ambiguous.
Yeah, I think, of course, there's a clear relationship between crime, the economy, and poverty. I read recently in the media that we've had like 90 murders already for 2015, 20 of those being incidents of gender-based violence against women in particular. Obviously, the crime problem has been around for a while, and we can't expect the new government to turn it around in 100 days. I don't recall if that was one of the promises in the plan, but I would hope
No,
not.
but I'm not saying that this was
Yeah, for sure. But I think the budget as well has implications for how crime will be dealt with. The Guyana police force needs to be better equipped. We need to set higher standards for who we employ as police officers and so on. And the only way we could do that realistically is if we raise salaries across the board for public servants, but in particular for uniformed officers, uniformed services, police in particular. So I think that is key and an important issue that we need to see addressed at the level of the budget. I think we need to see more of a comprehensive strategy to address crime. It feels to me like we're at a place where we're putting Band-Aids on sores and not really getting to the roots of the crime problem. So we think enforcing 2M closure for bars is going to significantly reduce crime. Why? Can somebody say that most of these murders have taken place between 2 and 6 a.m.?
No one can say that.
Do we have any data? Do we have any statistics to prove that?
I think many people are of the opinion, myself included, that a 2 a.m. curfew, it does nothing really for crime. Alcoholics are going to be alcoholics. If people don't want to go home to their wives at the end of the night, as I saw in one suggestion, they're not going to go home. But what it does do is it curbs noise pollution, which I want to get into in a bit. But in as far as crime is concerned, I love that you started off your point speaking to the fact that it's sort of intertwined as well with poverty, right? So what are your thoughts on that, Chevy?
A couple of things. First of all, let me start with the budget and the economic situation. I think, and I've not been hearing or seeing this too much around, but I think one of the reasons that we may have this quote-unquote economic slowdown is because, first of all, the government is one of the largest investors in the economy, and so without that injection, things naturally slow up. There's less revenue going around. Aside from that, investors, both local and international, they usually look to the budget to see which areas government is making priority, and in many cases, they inform themselves based on where government chooses to invest. So I think that's one of the reasons that at least I've not been seeing too much emphasis on as one of the reasons that we may have this.
Basically because the budget hasn't
Not only,
one
but
reason
it's probably one of the reasons, yes.
the money hasn't trickled down into the rest of it.
I'm not talking about the trickle-down effect, but I'm talking
want
about
to be very clear.
the investment in the economy.
Exactly, yeah.
The investment in the economy. Government spends billions every year. The budget, in which is the amount of money government is proposing to spend for each year, has not been passed. So we don't have that as yet, right? And I think that that's one of the reasons which is affecting the amount of money we have circulating in the economy. With regard to crime, yes, we have a crime problem. That is very, very obvious. But the factors which have precipitated this crime problem did not come about within the last 2 months. They were always there. And because of a lack of statistics, we don't know what has really caused this spike. I mean, we can say poverty because poverty is a continuous reason for crime. But specifically, what has led to, in the last couple of months, what has precipitated this at least what we
we see as a
describe
crime wave.
as a spike. What we don't know because we don't really have the statistics to say. We can
Exactly.
venture assumptions.
Venture
Yeah.
assumptions. You're
Because we
right.
live in a society, but we don't know about regarding addressing crime problem and the overall efficiency of the Guyana police force is going to take a lot. Joel spoke about increasing salaries. Increasing salaries is one of the reasons that you can attempt to address corruption or make the police force more effective. But at the same time, you have to ensure that the persons who sign on to being police officers want to be police officers because they want to protect and serve.
Right.
But you
Because
see it.
I think
will
it's also
inform-
important to raise the entry requirements, but
Yes.
you can't do that if the
If
salaries
the
are not
salary is too low, it's
commensurate.
a sort of chicken and the egg.
Yeah, so
conundrum.
you can't raise the entry requirements to becoming a police officer if you're not paying people properly. So it's all very
And
connected,
if you're
like you
not paying
rightfully
people
said.
properly, it
so-
will attract a certain type of
Yeah.
of graduate.
But I don't want to lose the point that Chevy was making about crime data and crime statistics and having kind of information that is needed. What do we know besides that 20 of the 90 murders for the year were related to gender-based violence? What about the other 70? Do we know?
There's very
Do we
few
know how much of
statistics.
that is related to maybe drug trafficking, money laundering? There are perceptions that we have when we see certain types of individuals being killed, being robbed and killed, and so on.
I
How
would
much of it
even-
is how much of it is driven by poverty?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Because I would pick you up on that point because I normally will deliberately, when I ask people about the crime problem, like I ask the question here about the crime problem, and the way in which I've done it is a bit deliberate, especially for the folks at home, to start thinking, when we think about crime, like we spoke about poverty, right? But not all criminals are impoverished. There is also white-collar crime, which
Right.
for some reason in Guyana we don't really acknowledge as a sort of crime. It's like other crime.
Right.
When we speak of a crime wave in Guyana, we're normally talking about there are more people robbing people on the streets, more people snatching phones or
Petty
breaking
criminals.
into house, right? It's not always petty, but relative to the amounts of money, and this is what I guess I'd love Guyanese to wake up to. Relative to the amounts of money that gets stolen just in offhand ways. Like, look, in the last couple of weeks, they found one guy with $27 million from the Petro-Carib account that's just found its way into his bank book. And what fascinates me about Guyanese, and perhaps you could share some of your perspectives on this, is we see a man that gets caught on the road with a gram of marijuana and he gets put in jail for 3 years, or a guy that steals a phone and he goes away for 3 years. But when we hear of a man that stole $27 million from the state, a state in which some people send their kids to school in the morning, unable to really afford the breakfast for them or their school shoes and the like, when that amount of money gets siphoned, folks are sort of more dismissive about it. How do you think we ended up?
I think in a lot of cases we compartmentalize crime. It's like compartmentalizing sin in many cases because one crime is worse than the other. If we take a simple example, and I'm going to defer to Joel, bribery, right? What do we perceive as bribery? Many times Guyanese we perceive, and I'm not sure if it obtains in other states because I haven't been to many other places. But in Guyana, for example, you see bribe as being some high-ranking member of a private company, whether it's private company or government, being bribed for whatever reason. But when you are not wearing your seatbelt or when you're carrying overweight in the car and your police stop you and you just pass $2,000, people don't perceive that
Or you
as
have a tint on your car.
you don't
and
perceive that as anything wrong. As a matter of fact,
Or as corruption.
that is part of the system.
Yeah.
That is the way it's perceived by a lot of people on the
That's
streets.
on the head.
But-
Or you don't see it as corruption
Exactly.
either. You don't even see it as a bribe.
And
then-
it's acceptable. I mean, something as simple as waiting on the green man when you're crossing the road. On several occasions. I try to ensure that even when I'm in a hurry, wait there. And I see parents with children. I saw one time a young girl. She was about 6, primary school child. She's there with her mother in front of the light. The light goes to change. Mommy, we gotta wait on the green. Walk across the road. Pull the child across the road. So things as simple as that. There's really no respect for law the simplest of laws. And so because there's no respect for the simplest of laws in many cases at all levels, there really is no regard for some of the more important laws. And some of us, we want to disregard the simpler laws, but pay more attention to the more important laws. It doesn't work
Indeed.
like that.
So we have this sort of this perspective where we're willing to look at some things, but not other things. And I guess in some senses, what I'm getting is that crime is fed by, or rather supported more by a system that is also unaware of its own corruption, or rather that doesn't acknowledge it, and where there's not the system, like we were talking earlier about the police being paid properly and having the right people entering and the like. So I'm getting the sign here. I think we need to take a quick ad break. It's fantastic chatting with you guys. We'll be back in a couple minutes. So I will see you in a bit back at Off Defense.
HGP-TV is looking for marketing and sales consultants. Are you confident with excellent presentation skills? Are you able to demonstrate your sales success? Do you want to work in media marketing or sales? If you are, we would like to speak to you. Please contact Ms. Carl Felix at carlfelix@hgptv.com. Please reply immediately.
And welcome back to Off Defense, the weekly topical discussion focusing on current affairs and everything you need to know to help you make up your mind and hopefully get off defense. As you know, defense is one of the oldest meeting places. That's where neighbors meet, and you get to learn a bit more about the other side, and that's the idea behind this program. We're joined once again by Joel Earl Simpson from the Blue Caps, and we've got Chevy Devonish from the Guyana National Youth Council. Thanks again. We've, in this program thus far, discussed the 100-day plan. We touched on that a little, and we've touched on crime. I'm going to open the floor now in our third segment here and ask what are some of the burning things that are in your minds and that you've seen coming from especially the youth populations that you're very much involved in. What are some of the burning issues you see for people on the street today?
For us at Blue Caps, local government elections, we have been championing that issue since last year when we first launched. And we think that this is crucial to give people the power to affect change at the community level in their own communities.
But I want to take you a little step further there, right? Often when local government elections and these things come up, we hear a lot of talk about empowerment and the like. When I talk to a lot of young people, I realize that folks still don't get it.
Because we haven't had it for 2 decades, Francis.
It's true. But there are a couple people listening to this now, especially young people, who probably still don't get it. So when you're giving your explanation here, I want you to just go to town a little bit on what does it mean? What's this whole local government thing people keep? It sounds like the government minister that lives around your corner when you talk about local government, you know?
It means electing people from your neighborhood who will be in charge of your affairs, who will be dealing with things like issues like garbage disposal, the environment, and so on. Things that affect you directly in your community. It's being able to elect your peers from your neighborhoods, your constituencies.
Wow, so like if the drain wasn't done well, you could go around the road
to somebody
and find the guy that did the drain for you, that maybe got a contract for it.
Exactly.
That's transformative.
So I think it's challenging because for young people especially, I've never voted in a local government elections. And I think many of the organizations like G.N.Y.C and Blue Caps, they had it for 20 years. So no surprise there. We'll have a huge responsibility, I think, to educate young people about why this is important, why local democracy gives people the power to solve problems that are close to home. We're not talking about the macro issues like like economic policy and so on. We're talking about very, very specific issues which relate to our communities, and that's what local government is about. So I think that becomes very important for addressing a lot of the problems. Okay, we've had the big cleanup campaign. The trenches are overgrown again. The litter problem is resurfacing again. We can't spend $1 billion and clean up the city every time. There needs to be also a culture of educating people about solid waste management, about garbage
And
disposal, and
maintenance.
so on, and maintenance and so on.
Sustainability of the entire
Yeah, so we have to change
effort.
attitudes and so on. There's a lot of work to do around public education. The issue of corruption that Chevy spoke about and so on, just passing a small change to the police officer and so on when you get caught without your seatbelt. The participation of individuals in corruption and how that is tied and how that is related to the former government minister and public servant who might attempt to defraud the state of 8 vehicles. People see that as corruption, but don't see passing a towel as corruption. So there's a
Yeah,
huge...
to the fact we even call it a towel.
Call it a towel,
It's
right.
not even
that simple.
1,000, yeah. It's a towel.
So I think there's a huge amount of work to do around public education around these issues because the society has become so lawless over the last few decades. And I think that's the point that Chevy was making too about lack of respect for even the most basic laws. So we have to change that entire culture of our people. And we have to be frank and call a spade a spade. It's a lawless society. It's a lawless culture which we have allowed to develop and become endemic over decades. So we have to change hearts and we have to change minds.
Beautiful. What are your thoughts, Chevy?
I'm going to talk about civic education. As we've talked about before, I'm very, very big on civic education because especially, we live in a democracy. If I can get a bit theoretical, democracy is really coined
but
from...
hold on, get theoretical, but always
Of
remember,
course,
we're
sure.
off defense. We want everybody to be able to understand.
It will be understandable, trust
right?
me. Listen, you didn't even give me a chance, man.
but hold on, I just telling you that before, we get
All right, good. 2 Greek words. One which means power.
It starts with the Greek words.
Yes,
I'm not using the Greek words. One which means power and the other one which means people. So a rough translation is people power. So the
But
sense...
you can tell the people the Greek words. It's demo and kratis.
Well, you see,
is
you
the
want
other word.
to know...
I
you
make
telling
no
me to be...
It's all Greek to me.
To be out of defense and so on. So I mean out of defense. One means power and the other means people. So rough translation is people power. Right, so what this definition tells you, or what it tells you is that the people are the ones who have the power, but and there are 2 important assumptions of a democracy, and that is that people are knowledgeable of the political system, what is going wrong, and how to access certain levers in the system, and that they're participating. If you don't have these 2 things taking place in a democratic society, then the quality of democracy that you have will be diminished. And that is one of the problems that we have, and that is why I'm very big on civic education. First of all, you have to know that you have the power. I was in a conversation with several persons the other day, and I told them to think of government this way. You are employer, government is employee. And that blew their minds
That's a
because
mind-blowing
they never
concept for some people,
conceptualized
though.
it that way. You are the ones with the power, and if it is that the government is not functioning in a way that is pleasing to you, then you can get rid of them. But you see, because of the way that we think and the way that we make decisions in Guyana, that's difficult to do because in spite of performance, we go by loyalty. So I want to talk very, very briefly on civic education. It is very, very important that we know the type of system that we live in. It is very important that we know what applies, what doesn't apply, what is important, what isn't important. For example, the 3 arms of government, what are their responsibilities? What is your role in this society? How much power do you have? What can you do if it is that you're not satisfied? And I think that the young people have an immense part to play in this, secondary school as well as primary school, because remember, they are going to be the leaders of the next in the next couple of years, but we won't get a change in the quality of leadership if we have persons thinking the same way. We have cases where persons are in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, and they can't tell you what the 3 arms of government are, what the responsibilities of these 3 arms are. People don't know that Guyana has a written constitution. That there's actually a document called the Written Constitution. In that Constitution, Article 9, sovereignty lies with the people, sovereignty, absolute and unchallengeable power. You express that power through your representatives in the National Assembly. It helps you to understand certain things and it helps you to better participate. But in Guyana, because of the type of political culture that we have, we're not interested, many young people, we're not interested in politics. We perceive it as something bad, as something dirty. But you see, the thing is, politics is like a gun. Is a gun bad or good? You may argue it is bad,
Debatable.
but it depends on who's using it. And so politics isn't bad or good. It depends on how it's practiced, because there's several definitions, right? And these definitions speak to a good in politics in terms of what it's being used to do. One guy, Andrew Haywood, says it's the general activity through which we may create and amend our laws. What is bad about that? Nothing. But what is bad is how we go about
It's about the culture.
that activity. So that is a problem. That is why civic education, young people, we have to become educated about the system if we're going to be effective contributors to the system.
And one day
Speaking about
controllers
amending
of the system, because invariably life is a continuum. And this is one reason I always tell young people, get interested, get involved, get participating, because one day someone is going to fall off the end of the treadmill, this treadmill of life that we're all on. I am going to fall off the treadmill one day. This is simply life. But we are on a treadmill whether we admit it to ourselves or not, moving along in a direction. At some point, we will have to take control of the different systems of government. As youth, we will be straddled with the debt that's being racked up today. We will be the people that have to pay these things back. So I think it's absolutely beautiful what you've said down there, because empowerment is the only way. If you wait until that day comes before you start to learn the system and how it all works, because it's not even as you say, there are 3 branches of government and the like, it's not all very simple to understand. It does take some effort, but it is worth it.
Which is why we got to do the work.
Right. Speaking of amending laws, I also chair the Human Rights Policy Committee of Blue Caps, and we think law reform is very important to respect and protection of human rights, and there are a number of laws that we'd like to see amended to achieve that. You spoke about one of them, the legalization of marijuana for recreational use in small quantities. Is totally ridiculous that we
locking people up,
locking up young people for a joint, for a spliff. I know it's a quote-unquote controversial issue.
No, but it's controversial because you could go to jail for a spliff.
Yeah.
But for $27 million, you could just walk the streets, right? Or billions of dollars.
Or defrauding the state of 8 vehicles, you could get bail.
Bail, that's fine. That's bail. That's
for 200 and 300,000.
Really?
Regarding the spliff thing, right? I actually did some research on marijuana and penalties regarding marijuana. I know that Brazil and Trinidad, for example, they have much more effective laws, because if you get caught with about the same amount if you get caught in Guyana. I think Guyana you get about 3 years. 3 years is the maximum. And in many cases you find persons, irrespective of the amount, they get 3 years in many cases. In Barbados and Trinidad, they get much lighter sentences, and a lot of that
because why would you send someone to jail to become a proper criminal?
So I wouldn't. I mean, we have different perspectives. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the legalization.
That in itself could be. I'll invite you gentlemen back for the longer show, because it will no doubt be a much longer, more controversial
we'll take up all your time.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what though, we must. We've run out of time for today on Off Defense, so we must open the gate and usher ourselves out of the garden. So I look forward to having you on the show in the future. I want to tell all the viewers at home, I'm glad that you tuned in. You can find out more on our Facebook page, which is Off Defense on Facebook. We'll have a YouTube coming up. Stay tuned in the coming weeks. We've got some really exciting shows and topics lined up for you, with more very well educated and informed guests as we have had today.
I know we're educated.
Definitely. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for coming into the studio and sharing your thoughts and your time with us.
Thanks for having us.
And for those of you at home, thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you the next Off Defense.